Welcome back. Uh, I'm going to have to admit that this is my second time recording this video. I had zero structure, and even I was getting confused when I was editing it. Hopefully, this one's a little easier to follow. But today we are going to talk about my experience in a Caribbean medical school. For those of you who don't know, there are multiple options of how you can get your medical degree and end up practicing in the US. The most standard traditional route is applying to an MD program through a US university. There are also DO schools. So the line of thought is more was originally supposed to be more osteopathic or more holistic. There used to be a bigger disparity around kind of what specialties you could get into if you went the DO route. As far as I understand, it's pretty similar now. When I was applying, it was still different. And as someone who had been interested in surgery, there weren't as many examples of DO graduates getting into surgery. So that's why I had initially written that off. There are also international schools that are US accredited. So while they do not physically reside in the US, you kind of have all of the standards in place to make sure that when you do graduate, you are kind of ready to go in terms of applying for residency and ultimately practicing in the US. I went to one of those that was based in the Caribbean. There are a handful that are accredited. You have St. George's, the American University of the Caribbean, SABA, Ross University, the Medical University of the Americas, and the American University of Antigua. I had only ever heard of the top four back when I was applying. That's a third option to get in. And then the other one is for folks that are medically trained outside of the US in a school that is maybe set to the standards of the country in which you're in. You can complete your MD or similar. And then what you have to do is you basically have to then go and take all of our board exams, which are the way that you kind of show that you've learned enough to move on to the next phase of medicine. Even if you've taken the equivalent, for example, in your country, you have to take ours. And then you have to apply for residency, even if they've been practicing, let's say, neurosurgery for 20 years. So only in certain circumstances do you see folks doing that. I worked with a colleague in my research days who did that, but ultimately was the right decision for him, and people do it. So those are the four. Want to just kind of lay that path out, kind of zooming out maybe even a little bit further for anyone who is not in medicine or doesn't know anyone who's ever gone through med school. So you complete your undergraduate training. There are certain courses that you have to take in order to be eligible to enter med school. It varies slightly by school, but your basics in bio, chemistry, physiology, those sorts of things that you just need foundational knowledge on, so that when you show up and they start teaching you about bacteria, you already have kind of a foundation to go off of. And then you go into medical school, which is traditionally 4 years long. There are a handful of schools that are now 3-year programs, but the standard is 4. You spend your first 2 years really deep in the books, learning, memorizing everything you could possibly, need to really know to be a physician. And it's shifting now, but we really didn't get a lot of exposure to actual patients during that time frame. We would do, mock examples inside. We had a room that was like a fake hospital that you would, run things through, but you're really just studying for the first 2 years. At that point, you take your first board exam, which is called Step 1. Historically, that has been the score that determines your future options for residency. That has also changed since I was in school. Um, but after you pass that, then you're able to actually go and do rotations, clinical rotations in a hospital. So this is technically year 3. You rotate in all of the major specialties so that you get exposed to them, because you have to continue to take tests on information on OBGYN, on pediatrics, on surgery, on internal medicine. And it also helps you see and experience these different specialties. Whether you're interested at all in going into them, you at least understand how they work, so that when you go into a residency, you're always interacting with other arms of the hospital. And so this is a way for you to get exposure to that. And then your 4th year traditionally is an opportunity for you to do rotations in any specialty that you didn't get to do in year 3. So let's say my program didn't have or the hospital I was rotating at didn't have they weren't a trauma center, but I was interested in potentially trauma or surgical ICU, that sort of stuff. You would then go and do that rotation somewhere else. Or other people use it to do more rotations in the thing that they know they want to do, right? So let's say I wanted to be a kidney specialist. I would do rotations that are relevant to that, partially because obviously it's what you want to do. So that's how you would want to spend your time. Alternatively, it also is a great way to get exposure to folks that will be able to write you a letter of recommendation, will potentially be considering you for a residency at that location. And just to get, broader exposure. Every hospital operates a little bit differently, so you get to see, different things in different places. At that point, you then go and apply for residency. Residency ranges widely, I think, from like the shortest is 3 years to 9, I believe, for neurosurgery. And it depends on if you're at a regular hospital or at an academic center. So academic centers usually have you do at least 1 year of research with your residency. And so you apply, you interview, and then, funny enough, yesterday, March 21st, was match day. So you go into the system, you rank the programs you want, programs rank you, and all of a sudden this process kicks off, and it's going and trying to match you with different programs. And if you have ranked someone and they have ranked you, and there's still enough spots by the time they get to you in the rank list and you haven't been taken by another program, you're matched, and that is the decision. You do not get to say, oh, but I would rather have gone to A. It is decided, and that is done, and you're starting, and you're off. If you don't match, then there's a process called the SOAP afterwards, where you get to see all of the programs that have not yet filled all of their positions, and you can go reach out to them and try to do another match. After residency, a lot of people go and do fellowships. So fellowships are where you dive deeper, even further into a specialized version of whatever it is that you did your residency in. Internal medicine, for example, you would do a 3-year internal medicine residency, and then you would do a fellowship in cardiology or pulmonology or something like that. Same thing is true for surgery. So if I wanted to go into plastic surgery, there are a handful of residencies that are just plastics, but more often than not, you're doing your general surgery residency for 5 years and then doing a plastics fellowship on top of that. So all in all, very long period of time, right? Like shortest possible path would be 7 years. 6 or 7 years, I guess, depending on the med school you went to. If, let's say, I wanted to become a family medicine doctor, I do my 4 years of med school. I do my 3 years of residency. I then begin practicing. Up to it could be 15 or 16 years if I wanted to do a fellowship after doing a neurosurgery residency, for example. So that's kind of the basics on the process of I want to be a doctor to getting to actually practice. And that is going to be the framework that we follow as I'm going through my experience. So, starting again from the beginning, it's 2008, probably. I'm in college. I'm double majoring in business and chemistry based on guidance from a surgeon who I was actually shadowing at the time in plastics. And this was right around the time when everyone was opening their own practices or running their own practices. And he was, giving me advice that none of them know how to run practices. They don't have business degrees. They don't have, any of that uh, accounting training or any of that stuff in place. And so he's had to hire a lot of people to help manage the business of owning your own practice. And he suggested, he's like, I think it would be great to have both a business and chemistry or biology degree, which you would need to get into med school. And so that is what I chose to do. Took as many credits as I could, ended up having to go 4.5 years to get both degrees done. And that was fine. I knew it was going to be tough to complete both. I thought it was valuable to have both in place. And as I had mentioned, I was shadowing the surgeon at the time. And so I was talking to him. I'm not an overly patient person. And the thought of taking off, 9 months and, trying to find a job to fill the time while I applied for medical school, because I graduated in January and US medical schools all start in the fall, like regular college does in other programs. So you would apply, you'd find out in the spring, you'd have the summer, and then you would, start your classes in the fall. I was graduating in January. I did not want to wait. I thought that was just going to have to be my reality. So it is what it is. And the surgeon I was shadowing mentioned that his daughter had gone to one of these Caribbean medical schools and that she, I think, had matched into vascular surgery or cardiothoracic. I can't remember, which is a competitive specialty to get into. And he had mentioned that they do rolling admission. So every semester, you have a new class starting. So unlike a traditional program in the US where you have one class of 2025, for example, they had 3 different classes starting throughout the year. So you would have one that starts in the fall, one that starts in the winter, and one that starts in the summer. And so I didn't know that was a thing. So I looked, found the same list that we went over earlier, and went ahead and applied to those. I heard back from one of them in fairly short order. They wanted to set up an interview. Because they don't have a physical campus, right? And this was pre-COVID, pre-Zoom, everything. You would go and actually, interview in person, but they just had, rented office space in major cities. So I went and interviewed in Chicago because that was the closest hub to me. It was a strange interview. They were very perplexed as to why I had spent time getting a business degree, and I had explained my reasoning. They were still kind of a little bit lost. And circling back to each school sometimes has their own requirements for what classes you have to have taken in order to apply. This particular school at that point in time did not require that you had taken a physiology class before. And I had actually wanted to do that in college, but it was such a competitive, or it was such a hard class to get into because everyone that's pre-med, pre-dental, pre-PT, pre-whatever, all want to take this class. And it was like I was going to have to take it at another college. And I just said, well, I don't, it would have been good probably to have taken that, but it's not on the requirements for any of the schools I was looking at. So I just kind of said, whatever, it is what it is. And they were all up on my ass about not having taken it. And I said, not to be that guy, but if it's that important, you probably should have it as a required course listed on your website because it's not. So I'm getting a little bold, interesting in hindsight, but I kind of wrapped up the interview. My parents were, I don't know if we were just in Chicago for something or what, but my parents were there. I came down. I said, I don't know that went well. I don't know if it was like 24 hours, at least within a week. I had an acceptance and they were like, hey, we know you applied for like this cohort, but there's one starting in a couple weeks. Would you be ready to go? I'm like, hell yeah. That was the whole reason why I applied to these schools. And so before I had even heard back from the other 3 that I applied to, this one had kind of moved me along quick. They're like, put down a deposit. We will see you in a handful of weeks. I was obviously excited. This was my dream, my goal. I wanted to be a doctor. I'm like, cool, let's do it. Pull the trigger. Let's go. Hindsight, probably would have waited and at least interviewed at 2 of the other ones, but I was just excited. I went with it, full send. So we're scrambling around trying to figure out how I even find an apartment there, because they don't have dorms or anything like that. And it's not like you can just jump on Zillow. It was more of a manual process. Get on a plane with as much stuff as I could fit in, a suitcase. And it's one of those islands that you're not getting a direct flight from anywhere on the continental US. So we had to connect, I believe, in Miami, and then Miami to, I think we were supposed to connect in Puerto Rico, but we ended up having to connect in Barbados. And somewhere along that line, my friend Sarah, who's an incredibly extroverted, amazing person, stood up on the plane and just said, who here's going to? And she was a couple rows like in front of me, and I just waited because I am not an extrovert. And slowly hands started raising up, and I, slowly put mine up too. She's like, awesome, we're all going to be friends. This is going to be great. Da, 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 da. and we get to Barbados, where they don't know where our plane that we're supposed to be getting on is. I know this was, 12 some years ago. I don't know that we just lose planes. I mean, GPS existed then, so I don't know what that was all about. But we ended up being kind of stranded in the Barbados airport for a number of hours. And so we all just kind of were forced to sit on the ground with our bags and get to know each other and begin the trauma bonding that was our med school experience. And that basically was our core group. A handful of us that got along when we were in that airport. Still friends with multiple of them today. And the plane magically does show up at some point. We all board. I think it's at this point, by the time we get to the island, it must have been midnight. Must have been. And so we're all exhausted. It's hotter than shit. We're lugging our bags. It's the smallest airport I've ever seen in my entire life. It's like one room and it's half open air, and it's just a mad dash to like grab your bags. 50% of people's bags didn't even make it. And there's this giant bus that you get on, and they take you from the airport down to the campus. It's like an hour drive. And whoever paved that road either was wildly intoxicated or really did not want to knock down that many trees, because it was, I mean, whippy windy. I am so surprised this bus actually survived. And so motion sick, haven't showered, sweating our asses off, strange country, get to the campus, and obviously the landlords, who all were supposed to come and pick us up and take us to the place because we don't know where the hell that is, thought that we were going to be here hours ago because the plane, we didn't intend on the plane being lost. So half of us are standing there with no landlords. Eventually mine comes and gets me. We go get to the place. It's perfectly fine. Shower, pass out, like pure exhaustion. And then we have to start figuring out, like, where are the grocery stores? Where's this thing? How do we use these new phones that we just got? Or I think we still had to go get at some point. And we're all just adjusting to this new reality, which we all knew was going to be different, obviously, than where we grew up. I'll say the island that we were on is not what you would traditionally picture of, like, the white sand beaches, the beautiful blue waters, the kind of the luxurious accommodations for people that are vacationing. It is more of a nature island where we had to be informed that there's like giant centipedes that you really want to make sure you don't step on because they have stingers on both sides. And if you step on them, they'll get your ankles, and there's boa constrictors and all. But we're still happy. We're here. Let's go. And the first thing that you do before you even start classes is it's kind of like a reverse graduation. So you have a white coat ceremony. It's meant to mark kind of your official start on the journey. When you're in the hospital, you see, physicians walking around in their white coats. They're down to like almost their knees, right? Well, these were kind of like shorty robes. So it was more of like a right at your kind of pocket level. And I will never forget, we were sitting in this auditorium. Very few of us had like family that were able to come down. It's a hell of a trip, A, and B, expensive and all that. And we're sitting there, and the dean gets up and he starts giving the speech. And he said, everything that you've done up until now means nothing. And I think we all kind of like took a punch to the gut on that one, because what the hell do you mean? We just busted our asses trying to get here, worked so hard in undergrad and everything else that we had to do. Plus, we're all really kind of going through it, trying to figure out how to regulate our body temperatures differently than we were before, figure out where the hell we needed to be. And he said, everything that you've done up until now was what you did to get here. Everything that you need to do from here on out is what matters. So I'm already not a huge fan of the direction that we're going here with the speech. And then he mentioned something that at the time I balked at. I was like, there's no way. But he said, be prepared for everyone in your life to not understand what you're going through. And the friends that you have now, expect, I think it was like half of them or a third of them to be around for the long haul. And I'm like, why? What is this doomsday stuff? I don't really get all that. Hindsight, not wrong. um, but the sentiment that I think he was trying to get at is this is an experience that you're going to have that no one else is going to have. Unless you happen to have family members that are in medicine or have done something like this before in the past. There were a couple points when I had been home for a break or something, and you run into a classmate. They ask you, "Hey, what have you been up to?" And "Hey, med school. It's been really tough, but super excited. And how about you? What are you up to?" And I'll just use a non-real hypothetical, like, "Oh, I'm a manager at a restaurant now, but it's not as cool as what you're doing." And it's like, no, hey, I talk about medicine, think about medicine, dream about medicine 24/7. I would love to hear about something other than medicine. I don't care what it is. You painted your house. Cool. What color? I needed some normalcy. And I get it. It can be perceived as intimidating or whatever. I don't know. But if you know someone currently in med school, in residency, in some part of this, and they're asking you what you're up to, they actually probably care. A, and B, your thing is just as cool as the thing that I'm doing. I just chose to do this thing, right? Um, Little tidbit there, but so we white coat ceremony wraps. We've got, our little coats. I find out that there were already like 20 some people who had already left. They got there, they saw the accommodations, they, experienced island life for like 2 days and said, I'm good. I'm going back home. Which is, I guess to each their own, but a little hilarious to me to go through all of that effort. And like, did you not do any research? Did you not Google? Did you not go on any forums about the school and whatever? So that is the start of my med school journey. We're in classes for only a handful of hours in the morning. And then the anticipation is that you go then to the library or they have like a giant study hall to digest the information that had been rapid fire thrown at you. One of the things that is very different from college to med school, at least the school I went to, was in college, it felt like they were introducing a topic, running through examples, doing live activities with you so that you could start getting your bearings around it. And then you were assigned homework. Med school is, here's a week's worth of content in slides. I'm introducing you to the topic, but I anticipate that you are going to teach yourself the actual information. And I will say that takes an immense amount of self-control and a deep understanding of how you actually learn, because you're implementing it yourself, that I had never experienced. I had never even considered what what is my learning style? I had undiagnosed ADD my whole life. So it was wait until you might be hitting the period on the last sentence 10 seconds before it's due. That's how I existed my whole life. I needed that immense stress to propel me to do the work that I needed to do in a very rapid fashion. And so I'm sitting here with 80 slides that I just got about like every bacteria that exists. And I'm trying to figure out how the hell am I supposed to memorize this? And you find tips and tricks. I will say one of the things that was positive, kind of in retrospect, of going to a Caribbean med school is that it's not just like your friend group or your class that's kind of trauma bonded. It's all of the classes that are on island have, we've all lived this shared experience in a wild way. And so early on, the upperclassmen were like, you got to get on mnemonics. You got to get on. There was some like picture thing. Um, there were a ton of ways that we were all just trying to ingest and retain just an unbelievable amount of information from my perspective. And what that meant was you did your classes, you furiously took notes. We all had the option to attend classes live, or you could watch them. They were all recorded, so you could watch them yourselves. I had switched from in person to watching myself, I think maybe my second semester, just because that was the only way I could actually stop and learn certain things along the way. You basically went to class in the morning, grabbed lunch, and then locked yourself away in the library or the study hall. I mean, usually till like 10 o'clock. And you're just Googling and rewatching the lecture and trying to understand this thing and make your own notes and trying to find a way to put that information in your brain. Because this isn't just like for me in college, learning, I don't know, different accounting things or different methods of marketing or whatever the hell, where I'm like, yeah, okay, I just have to pass this test and then I'm done. I'm sitting there like, I'm going to have to know this for forever as I'm practicing medicine. So got really, really, really into Red Bull and was just taking it, drinking, 5 or 6 a day just to try and stay awake and care enough about what I was doing. So then I heard through the rumor mill that there was a like counseling center on campus that it was fairly easy to get prescribed Ritalin. I actually did end up answering the questionnaire honestly, and that was the first time it kind of clicked that, oh, I actually do have ADD in a real way. So got on that, was, gung ho studying 12 hours a day. In addition to studying, they had clubs that you could join because I was interested in surgery. I joined the surgery club. They had like a soccer team. There were a couple things that you could do to fill whatever extra time you had. So we had our first surgery club meeting or whatever, and the person running the club was someone who had graduated from the program I was in, but had not matched into a residency. And so the school paid them to come back and help teach. I think it was probably the first first meeting. It's like, just so you know, you're going to have to score 20 points higher on your board exam than a US med student to even be considered. And that was the first time I had ever heard that, and that was the first time that I realized it seemed a little too good to be true. How quickly they get you in, how quickly you get an acceptance, it all kind of started to seem a little like a gotcha, but I was like, "Well, I'm here. We have to do it. Let's do it." And that, in addition to also now I had, this Ritalin prescription, I went all in. Like I was studying like crazy, crazy, crazy. And when I needed a break and I needed something else to do, I just ran everywhere. So in a span of one semester, I lost probably 60 pounds, which is not recommended by any stretch of the imagination. So I remember finals first semester, we're all gung ho. I had gone home or to my apartment. And one of the things about this island is that you prepay for electricity. And my first apartment did not have a meter that told you how much you had left. And you had to go actually buy I think it was like a card of electricity at like a convenience store or something. And there were times that the country was out of electricity, so you couldn't buy more that day. And I think that night I had come home, I opened my front door, I went to hit the lights. They didn't come on. I realized my fridge is off, my clock is off, the AC's off. It's 90 degrees. And just in like a sigh of defeat, turned around, locked the door, and just went back to the library because at this point it was midnight, maybe 2 a.m. So none of the convenience stores would have even been open for me to get electricity if there was any to get. And so I just popped another Ritalin, chugged another Red Bull, studied through the night, walked from the library to the, the lecture hall where we took our final, took it, and that was really the only times when we would party is like after a major exam. Everyone would go down to the beach and have, this like homemade rum and all this other stuff. So went down, exhausted, party a little bit, went back, got electricity, went to sleep, and then came home for our first break. As I got home, I remember everyone, their first reaction to seeing me was about how skinny I was. And my grandma was like, "Do you have cancer?" It's like, "No, not that I know of. No." But I mean, I had lost weight in my fingers. I didn't know that that was a real thing. But with the stress, the lack of appetite, the running being my outlet, um, I was fairly skinny. Um, and so I just crashed when I got home. I went cold turkey on Red Bull. I probably did the same on Ritalin. Just kind of like needed a reset. Like slept and slept and slept. And then they released our semester scores, which were very heavily weighted by the final exam. And one of the other things that is interesting about how Caribbean medical schools work is that they decide what the cutoff is for pass fail based on how the entire class did. Understanding that there's a certain percent failure rate or attrition rate that they feel is appropriate, right? So instead of having a standard, I don't even remember what failing is, maybe like 65% or something. That was not how they did it. And that first semester, I think I got like a 80, 79, something like that. And because of the weighting distribution and the final being so heavily weighted, I ended up missing by less than 1%, which was interesting. That was the first time I had ever actually failed anything ever. And I'm looking at this and I'm like, I got basically an 80%. Like how does that constitute failure? And thinking about how hard I had never ever studied that hard or pushed myself that hard. And I'll never forget my dad asking me the question of like, well, okay, so what do you want to do? And I remember being so put off or confused by the ask, which is a very legitimate question to ask, right? They never pushed me to go to med school. They were never those parents at all. Funny enough, they got a doctor and a lawyer, but like they wanted me to go into like real estate or art or things that like I demonstrated interest in through my hobbies. And I said, well, of course I'm going back. Like there's no way that I'm not finishing this. And everyone was like, great, yep, totally support you. Just wanted to ask the question. And so I went back